So my first open ocean dive really changed the course of my career. I was going down with the intent of looking for bioluminescence. I had been working on bioluminescence for my PhD, and I knew there was bioluminescence in the deep ocean, but there were no cameras at that time that could record it. And I turned out the lights, and I thought I would have to dark adapt for a while to be able to see the luminescence. But I was immediately in the center of this fireworks display that was just absolutely mind-blowing. Sparkles and spews and sprays of light everywhere. And it was just absolutely breathtaking. And then I turned the lights on and there's nothing recognizable there. And it was just this most amazing revelation of, I knew at that point how much energy it takes for living things to make light. And I realized, this has got to be one of the most important things going on in the ocean. Why aren't more people studying it?
Hello and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Linda Ulrich, and I'm also the co-founder of the mothership website of this podcast called The Goodness Exchange. Over there, you'll find a giant platform in place since 2014 that celebrates what's right with the world. We are talking to some of the most innovative, open-minded, forward-thinking folks in the world, and we are celebrating the way they are changing our shared future. And we're going to get started with that kind of an interview right now. Today, I'm joined by someone who has spent her life revealing a world most of us will never see, yet one that quietly sustains everything on our planet. Dr. Edith Widder is a pioneering oceanographer, an inventor, and a deep sea explorer whose work has transformed our understanding of the ocean as a place alive with light. That is a form of communication and a mystery being revealed that's allowing us to understand so many complexities that are going to make our world a better place over time. She's developed groundbreaking tools to observe marine life without disturbing it. And we're going to talk a lot about that because that turns out to be the key to really unlocking a knowledge base that before we had no way to access. She's earned her MacArthur Genius Fellowship for her work, and she has captured the first video footage of a giant squid in the deep. This is an important person who all her life has been working with courage and curiosity and a spirit of wonder that is an example to us all. But what makes Edie's work really, really important isn't just all that wonder. It is a wake-up call. By learning how life thrives in the darkest places on the earth, she is showing us how deeply connected the health of our entire planet is to the health of our oceans and to our own future. This conversation is about curiosity and courage, and why paying attention to what we can't see easily is more important than ever. So welcome, Dr. Edie Widder.
Hi there. It's great to be here.
Oh, I am so excited to talk to you today. We've had a nice pre-call recently and kind of developed what questions might be best because there is literally far too much to talk to Edie about, and we had to narrow it down some. But I spent the morning, hour and a half with a cup of coffee watching your amazing videography online and listening to some other talks you've given. And, I'm just saying right off the beginning, thank you from the world.
Well, thank you.
We just wouldn't, there's so much we wouldn't know were you not in this world. You've taken us and your colleagues on journeys we could have never gone on without you.
I've been to some pretty amazing places on this planet, and I wish I could take everybody there.
Edie, do I have this right? Just because I'm a science nerd, I thought I would know this sort of thing, but the average depth of the ocean is around 4,000 meters. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. No, the oceans are very, very deep. And that's why when you talk about the living space on the planet, because the oceans are so deep, they represent more than 99.5% of the biosphere. That's staggering. We are an ocean planet, and yet we know so little about it.
That is so typical of kind of human hubris, isn't it? We think just because we're walking around on the soil, that's all that matters.
Yeah, we live on these few little dry islands we call continents. surrounded by this vast watery world that we just know so little about.
About 99% in some?
More than 99% of the living space on the planet is in the oceans. If you figure the volume of on land is into the highest trees and, several meters down below the surface of the earth, it's still an incredibly thin layer compared to the depths of the ocean.
Wow. And light is the language there.
Light is so important to every aspect of life on Earth, but for a long time, it wasn't recognized how important light was in the deep ocean because it was thought there wasn't any down there because sunlight didn't penetrate. But in fact, there's a lot of light down there, and it's light made by living creatures.
Right. So this is, this is the essence of your work. You've spent, I don't even know how many years, 30 years plus, in the pursuit of ever better exploration in the deep. Like, you've been a pioneer in submersibles, right?
Yes, definitely.
It's so scary for me to even think about that. Like, like when I did the research on before talking to Edie, it was extraordinary. Like, you were down very, very deep, very, very early in machines that we couldn't absolutely trust.
Yeah. I mean, my first experience diving into the deep ocean was in a diving suit called WASP, which was developed by the offshore oil industry for diving on oil rigs down to 2,000 feet. And it looked kind of like a metal spacesuit with pincers instead of hands and Michelin Man arms. And there weren't legs, there were just thrusters. And you piloted it by using foot switches you could go forward or backward, and it was tethered to the surface. So I was sort of like a tea bag on a string being bounced up and down. As the boat bounced up and down, I was being bounced up and down, but I could go down to 2,000 feet in that thing.
Okay. Now there's I'm going to tell people right off, I'm sure you're going to mention things. I'm going to mention things, resources for people to go to after they've listened to this interview. And I want people to know that you don't have to grab a pen. I'm going to make sure that every single resource, Dr. Widder and I mention is in the show notes for you. And I'm going to mention a book called Deep by a guy named James Nestor. Are you familiar with James's work?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. And in that book, what I loved about it was the context. He made sure that you had the context of how much light actually penetrates this deep. And then I think he starts with like 1 inch or a millimeter or something. And then, so at 2,000 feet, so I can highly recommend that book. It may or may not be scientifically perfect at this stage because we're learning so fast. But at 2,000 feet, how many photons, how much sunlight is actually getting down there?
Well, it's different in different parts of the ocean. So in the clearest ocean water, there is visible light as far down as 3,000 feet, but only to the very most sensitive eyes. And 2,000 feet, there are definitely, in the clearest ocean water, I can still sometimes detect light overhead. It's gray. There's no color to it. And it's very, very dim.
So this absence of light and this sort of like an intuition that you seem to have, that there was more there that you were in a dilemma. If you turned on all the lights all around you, then you couldn't see what was important. But if you turn the lights off, how much could you see? Like, tell me about the very first time you were in some kind of submersible and discovered that the lights on the submersible were actually the problem.
Yeah, so my first open ocean dive in WASP was transformative. It really changed the course of my career. And it was just a checkout dive to make sure I wasn't going to have a claustrophobic meltdown. And it was a late evening dive, and they dropped me down to 800 feet. And I had the lights on as I was going down, and there wasn't much in the water column except the usual type of marine snow, very little recognizable stuff. And I was going down with the intent of looking for bioluminescence. I had been working on bioluminescence for my PhD, and I knew there was bioluminescence in the deep ocean, but there were no cameras at that time that could record it. And so you just had to depend on people's descriptions of what they saw, which were very unsatisfying. And so, I went down to the 800 feet and I turned out the lights, and I thought I would have to dark adapt for a while to be able to see the luminescence. But I was immediately in the center of this fireworks display that was just absolutely mind-blowing. Sparkles and spews and sprays of light everywhere, and it was all different blues mostly, and absolutely spectacular. When I activated the thrusters on the suit, there would be these jets of light that would spew up out of it, and sparks that looked like when you throw a log on a campfire and the embers swirl up off the campfire, only these were icy blue embers. And it was just absolutely breathtaking. And then I turned the lights on, and there's nothing recognizable there. And it was just this most amazing revelation of, I knew at that point how much energy it takes for living things to make light. And I realized, this has got to be one of the most important things going on in the ocean. Why aren't more people studying it? But the obvious answer was, how? If you can't record it, how do you do this?
And of course, the creatures are down so far, and that you can't necessarily bring them up alive because they're used to a certain amount of pressure all around them. Don't they just sort of disintegrate by the time you get them to the surface? How do you?
Well, actually, before the dives in WASP, I had been going out to sea on these deep sea trawling expeditions, and we would have nets and we'd bring the animals up into our world where we're comfortable, and obviously they aren't. But animals don't die so much from coming up by the change in pressure because most of them don't have air-filled spaces in their bodies. What kills them is the change in temperature because the temperature in the deep is so cold. And you bring them up to surface waters, they're basically cooked alive. So I had been going on expeditions with a scientist that had developed a special kind of net that had a thermally insulated cod end on the end of it that could be seal at depth. And so you could bring the animals up cold, and so then you could bring them up alive. So one of my first experiences in deep sea exploration was on this trawling expedition. We brought in the net at night, and we dumped it into a bucket on the deck, and it just blew light, just all everywhere in the bucket. And then, everybody was reaching and pulling out stuff, and I reached into the bucket and I pulled out a shrimp the size of a hamster, a bright red shrimp. And it had two nozzles on either side of its mouth, and there was liquid light, blue liquid light, swirling, coming out of it, and pooling in the palm of my hand and then dripping between my fingers back down into the trawl bucket. And it was just like, oh my God, this is absolutely amazing. And so it was actually possible to bring these animals up alive and study them. But, if you want to be able to see how they behave in their natural environment, then you had to go to them instead of bringing them to you.
Oh my gosh. There's so much to be considered there. Okay. So we're going to talk a lot about bioluminescence because there's so much wonder there. I can't even compute here for a minute. But let's give a little bit more context to folks before we dive in over there. So, did we know much about the world of communication? Like, how many years ago are we talking about that we really didn't? It's like within my lifetime, we didn't know tectonic plates existed.
Yeah, I know. It's been a lot of transitions over time. So that first dive in WASP was in 1984. And, the question was, what is the natural visual environment in the deep sea actually like? So one of the questions at the time was how much spontaneous bioluminescence is there in the ocean? So it was around the 1950s when oceanographers started lowering light detectors into the ocean called photomultiplier tubes. And they were just trying to measure the penetration of sunlight. How far does sunlight penetrate into the deep ocean? But as it got deeper, they started seeing flashes of light, and they eventually realized it was bioluminescence. And there were actually several papers published where they were counting the numbers of flashes until somebody recognized the fact that the numbers of flashes varied depending on the sea state. If it was very bumpy at the surface, this thing was bouncing up and down and stimulating more luminescence. So they knew there were light-producing creatures down there. And then the other way we knew about them is we'd bring them up in nets. And in the early days, they'd bring them up dead. And so they wouldn't necessarily be able to see anything about their luminescence except that they had light organs sometimes that were visible, but not producing light. But then to be able to go out with this net system that could bring the animals up alive allowed us to start looking at some of the ways they produce light, and then take it to the next level was how do we go down and figure out what they're actually doing with their light down there.
Because that is a whole spectrum of wonder all on its own. I think in some recording that I saw of you say blue light seems to be a common currency, but there are some that produce red and so forth and so on. Talk to us a little bit about the biology of producing light.
So bioluminescence is a form of chemiluminescence. It's light made by a chemical reaction. You see chemiluminescence when you break a light stick. Those are man-made chemicals. But with bioluminescence, the animals actually synthesize the chemicals that make the light. The astonishing thing is that bioluminescence has apparently evolved many times. Now I think we're up over 90 times now in evolutionary history. Which is a clear indication of the survival value of the trait. When you have that kind of degree of convergent evolution, how do you survive in the dark? Make your own light. And so they use different chemicals to do it with. And bioluminescence actually comes in all colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, extends into the ultraviolet and slightly into the infrared. But the vast majority of it in the open ocean is blue, because that's the color that penetrates furthest through seawater. Everything looks blue underwater because of that. And so when evolution selects for a form of communication, it selects for the wavelength that travels furthest through seawater. And so blue is the one that shows up again and again. In coastal waters where there's more scattering, it tends to shift towards the green. But then there's some really fascinating exceptions that we sort of know something about. So there's these wonderful deep sea fish called stoplight fish that have red light organs under their eyes. And it turns out most deep sea animals, only make blue light and they only see blue light. But stoplight fish can make blue light and see blue light, but they can also make red light and see red light. And so they use their bioluminescence like a sniper scope to be able to sneak up on animals that can't see that red light and see without being seen. And then there's things like the gossamer worms, tomopterids, that produce yellow gold bioluminescence that spews out, and we have no idea why that is. And there's squid that can produce ultraviolet bioluminescence. I mean, there's just weird exceptions that we don't know anything about, and why were they selected for.
And presumably there's so much for us to learn and perhaps evolve into our own benefit. I guess I'm trying not to sound transactional about it, but
that is actually one of the big advantages of studying bioluminescence is it turns out that the chemicals that have been isolated from some of these bioluminescent animals have had a profound effect on cell biology, because they have been used to basically light up the inner workings of cells. And it's been said that the one fluorescent protein isolated from a bioluminescent jellyfish, green fluorescent protein, its discovery and application has been equated to the invention of the microscope in terms of the impact that it's had on cell biology. It's just absolutely staggering how important these different light producers are in terms of their impact on molecular biology and cell biology.
Okay, I'm just going to go a little sideways here, and you can tell as much or as little about this story as you need to. But you told me a story during the pre-call that made me stop and start looking around at things that people are saying no to these days. So one thing that I'm not sure everybody appreciates is that funding for the kind of work that Edie and thousands of other scientists do doesn't really fit our model of return on investment. Like, Edie goes down and learns all kinds of stuff that you can't predict where that knowledge will land or what it will improve, downstream. But we've got this crazy funding mechanism where you almost have to prove what the return on somebody's investment will be if they invest in your project or your updated submersible or what have you. I go a little deeper into that story about cancer research because I think that the way I understood it was that we just lucked out that you were able to gather all the funds for this submersible that helped discover this.
Well, actually, like a lot of things in science, there was another interest, a military interest.
Okay.
And military funding is helped a lot of science projects over the years. So in the case of bioluminescence, the Office of Naval Research had an interest in bioluminescence because of its ability to reveal, shall we say, large cigar-shaped objects moving through the water at night. And so they wanted to have a predictive capability. They wanted to know more about bioluminescence, where it is, how much there is of it, what the likelihood of it being in a particular place at a particular time. And so a lot of my funding in the early days came from the Office of Naval Research. There were some projects that were funded to look for the chemicals, as you say, that these were, there were a lot of efforts at grind and find, as it was called. It wasn't just bioluminescence, but also anti-cancer agents and other things like that. It's very expensive and not highly productive research, and so it hasn't seen a lot of funding. And so if you really want to just go out and explore which is, really what we should be doing on our own planet, the funding for that is very limited. So the NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, had a branch of ocean exploration that tried to address that limitation. But they've always been very poorly funded compared to, for example, space exploration.
But this particular discovery that you're talking about, the way because I've read about it in some other context, allows for the clinical detection of testing results being positive or negative on drug treatments for cancer, for instance. It's a huge deal. So huge.
It used to be, if you wanted to look at anti-tumor drugs, cancer-fighting agents, you'd have to, inject radioactivity to be able to see the tumor, and then be able to look at how different periods of time or different concentrations of a drug you were testing impacted that tumor. You had to just keep killing rats one after another. But with these bioluminescent chemicals, you could actually clone the light-producing chemical, insert it into the DNA, and then make the tumor glow, and be able to track the tumor in one rat or mouse, be able to see it over time and how it responded to the anti-cancer agents. Huge impact on that kind of research.
Mm-hmm. And so, I feel like we had to talk about that because, there's a lot of science ambiguity these days, like folks who don't want to invest in science and whole things being defunded. And wow, this is a perfect example of something we would be missing out on. How long does it take you to do drug trials if you got to kill a mouse every 3 weeks or maybe longer till you find out whether something's working? Now, the bioluminescence discovered through oceanography and the science there is allowing us to detect something and I'm sure speed things along by light years. So just wanted to mention that.
A good plug. We need more understanding of the importance of basic research.
Yeah. Definitely the basic research in science needs a better PR person. Okay. So speaking of that, you were, I guess before we take our break here, I want to just ask you a question that I'm not sure I put on our list. So if it's not something that comes to mind easily, we can move on. But, I really was putting a lot of thought into how courageous and how curious and how your curiosity may have been the factor that got you over, into doing some courageous things. Do you have Do you have a woman in your background who you think your original courage comes from? Do you-
Oh, no question. My hero was my mother.
okay,
Um,
tell me about her.
she was a remarkable woman. Grew up a farm girl in Western Canada. Her dad, my granddad, was a pioneer in Saskatchewan, broke virgin soil with a horse and plow. My mom spent her youth going back and forth to school behind a horse, either in a buggy or a sleigh. And yet she went on and got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in mathematics from the University of Saskatoon, and then University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And then she went on and got a PhD in mathematics from Bryn Mawr College at a time when women didn't do that kind of thing. So uh, I think I've over the years run into a lot of women that have been slowed in their progress by being told that they're not good enough to do something. And I just never had to waste any energy on that because my mother was clear evidence that that was rubbish. And so I made a huge difference. I think it's so important for young women, but young people, to have role models. And that's always been something that's been a problem in the early days for women in science.
Or even that they may have had role models sitting right there, but family lore was not highly tuned to pass on those stories. I started asking people this question because I was once on a really great trip kayaking in the Gulf of California and following blue whales and just having the time of our lives. And there was an executive from Exxon on this trip. And he and I spent an afternoon sitting on the very front of this little boat, getting to some location and talking about who were our heroes. And after, I'm embarrassed to admit, a solid hour talking about our dads, I mean, I'm like the original Gloria Steinem women's liberator. And here, I never even thought to go on about our mothers. But finally, after an hour, I'm like, wait, we're just going on about our dads. I'm curious about your mother. Tell me about her story. And his mother's story was far, far and away more heroic than his dad's. And mine sort of is too, because men had all the advantages 50 years ago and women just, oh gosh. And so from then on, whenever I had the opportunity, I asked my guests if there was some source of their original courage, and if it comes from a woman. And there's always a great story like yours. So thanks for sharing that with us, because she was a pioneer. It's very clear that from your earliest days, you never knew that there was some limitation or some notion that you didn't belong.
And my dad was also a math professor and never acted in any way, shape, or form. I mean, obviously, he was married to my mom, so
yes, yeah,
he was always a equal opportunity kind of guy.
Yes, and that's not to diss men at all. It's just that we never tell the family lore seems to go down with the dads, and we very often do not include our mom's courage in that kind of family lore. Okay, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk to Dr. Widder about all kinds of very cool things. She's got a biography that tells an amazing story that I think we all should hear and consider in our own lives. Okay, we'll take a break, and we come back. We'll talk with Dr. Widder even more. You know how the constant negative noise in our digital lives feels like it's reaching a boiling point? Now, many of us have tuned out the news and social media almost entirely. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. There are newsworthy stories about amazing progress, innovation, leaps in human potential, and wonders in the natural world, and they're just not reaching the top of our feeds. We can have access to this, but none of us has the time or maybe even the emotional stamina to search through all the doom and gloom news to find what's right with the world. Okay, enter the Goodness Exchange. There, we are giving instant access to positive news for curious people. Did you hear about the recent Harvard study that found that exposure to just 4 minutes of good news can make you 32% less anxious and 18% more optimistic. Well, I don't know about you, but I need those kind of numbers in my life. So if you want to live with more joy and way less fear, it's really simple. First, you join us at the Goodness Exchange. Everyone around the world has the opportunity to access this kind of content. And we've promised no politics for about a decade, so you're safe from all that distraction as well. Second, you allow this new, more positive, balanced worldview to put a spring in your step again. It can change the way you react to your kids, your coworkers, everybody you come in contact with. And the stories we write about can make you the idea person in your circles. These challenging times call for us to wake up and take control of our perspective. The people who use the Goodness Exchange have the ability to react to the harshness of the world much different because they know way more about what's right with the world. And that's a resource. So subscribe to the Goodness Exchange, our YouTube channel and the podcast, and use this content to live a more expansive worldview. It is still an amazing world out there, and you can be a part of it. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness. Okay, we're back with oceanographer, deep sea explorer, Dr. Edie Widders. Now, I'm going back and forth. I really love to respect a PhD, so I'm calling you Dr. Widder from time to time, but I feel like I know you well enough to call you Edie. Edie, you have an incredible biography. And in that biography, in that book is a wonderful story I want you to share with us. Anybody who's listened to this podcast a lot knows that I'm always encouraging people to move toward discovering what they're uniquely built to contribute. Like, I really believe all of us have something, and there's no measuring how large or small the impact will be. If we change the life of just one person over the scope of time, that changes generations. But you've got a really important story that adds to the weight of my my thesis that we all have some kind of purpose, and the sooner we can get on to discovering it, the better. Okay, so you've got a memoir that started out in a little bit different direction and became a memoir called Below the Edge of Darkness. Is that right?
That's correct.
And it goes so well with this story I need you to tell. You have a great personal origin story. Start anywhere you like and tell us about the book. And
it talks about how I came to be a marine biologist. The year I was 11 was a sabbatical year for my dad, and we traveled around the world and went to all kinds of amazing places. And I saw amazing art in Europe and decided I wanted to be an artist. And then we went to explore the pyramids of Egypt, and I decided I wanted to be an archaeologist. Saw horrendous poverty in India, and I decided I wanted to become a great humanitarian. Had amazing encounters with wildlife in Australia and decided I wanted to be a biologist. And then our last stop was in Fiji, and I got to explore a coral reef, and I decided I wanted to be a marine biologist. So the family joke is, if we had traveled from west to east instead of east to west, would I have become an artist? But I think a complete lack of talent would have undermined that goal. So I had this goal of wanting to be a marine biologist, and actually it made a huge difference in my life, because before that trip, I was a very bad student. I didn't like school. I hated school. I just thought it was keeping me from being where I wanted to be, which was outside. But then once I had this goal of wanting to be a marine biologist, I became a much better student, although still pretty world-class daydreamer. I found school pretty boring. And then was going to go to Tufts University and get a bachelor's degree focusing on marine science. And when I went in for my college physical, they ask you that question of, do you have any persistent pain? And I had a persistent pain down the back of my left leg, and I was a water skier and a snow skier and pretty athletic, and figured I'd just pull something. But they insisted on an x-ray, and it turns out my back was broken. And the doctor illustrated this by putting one fist on top of another and saying, between my fourth and fifth lumbar vertebrae, I had a 50% slippage. And so it was cutting off the nerve down my leg. And I'm pretty sure I know how it happened because I spent most of my childhood climbing up into and jumping out of trees. And I do remember one Sunday coming back from church, and I was in some stupid frilly little dress, and my parents wanted, we were going to go out later, and so they wanted me to leave this stupid dress on. And I asked if I could go out and play, and they said, yeah, but stay clean. And so I went and climbed my favorite tree. And then as I was going to jump out of it, as I had many times before, at the last minute, I remembered my promise to protect my clothes. And I jumped in a way that protected the dress instead of my back. And I definitely felt something bad happen in my back, but it didn't last. And I went on from it. And so I had to have a spinal fusion my freshman year in college. And it went very, very wrong. It turned out my orthopedic surgeon had just been to an AMA conference on this thing called disseminated intravascular coagulation, DIC. If you ever watch DR, they say the patient is crumping.
Okay.
Well, I crumped.
Okay.
And it was the surgery went fine, but it was in the recovery room. And normally the patient would die because the doctor sees their patient hemorrhaging and applies a coagulant. And in fact, that's what kills them. And my doctor had just been to this AMA conference, recognized it for what it was, and applied heparin, an anticoagulant. But that meant I was hemorrhaging everywhere. And so my heart stopped 3 times. And it turns out the Harkins chest team, a very famous surgical chest team, was at Mount Auburn Hospital in Cambridge that day, and they resuscitated me. But then I also hemorrhaged into my eyes. So when I came to, I was blind. It was, there were a whole lot of things that went along with this. I had a near-death experience. I was resuscitated 3 times, but I had only 1 NDE. It was this classic out-of-body experience that people describe. And the most remarkable thing about these NDEs is their similarity across cultures and everything. And that there's a sense of peace that comes with it. And it lasts for a while afterwards. So even though I was blind, I wasn't upset by it. And then for the first week, I think I was in intensive care unit, and then they brought me to the ward. And once I was on the ward, I started to have visitors, and somebody had brought this big bouquet of roses that everybody commented on when they came into the room. And then one day somebody commented on the beautiful yellow roses. And it was like somebody slapped me awake, because I realized yellow, and I realized I had just been filling in with my brain what those roses should look like and where they were, just based on where people were talking from. And I realized I didn't even quite know where the door was. I didn't know what anybody looked like. And so I had hemorrhaged into both eyes. And so it was like I was seeing through a blood curtain. And as my vision came, they couldn't tell me whether my vision would come back, because they couldn't see well enough to know if my retinas had detached. But it did start to come back over a matter of months, and I would see just flashes of light, glimpses of the world through this blood curtain kind of. And so it later, when I was thinking about these animals and how they live in the deep sea, they have to depend on flashes of light to determine, where there's food and where there's a predator and how they're going to respond to the world. And so I could relate.
My gosh, that is, did you make, when you first started studying bioluminescence, did you make that leap? Did you connect that? How long did it take before you connected those 2 insights?
Well, I think my fascination with bioluminescence early on was just my fascination with light and vision. There's no question that it just triggered my curiosity all the more. But no, I think it's kind of been over time. I've come to realize that I had this connection that I didn't fully appreciate at the time.
Well, that brings up a question or a comment that I'd love you to chat about. What I've noticed about all the scientists I've interviewed, so many, is that for them, awe isn't just a moment. It's not just a flash of great feeling. It's like a renewable resource. This sense of awe that you described when you realized, the life all around you that you couldn't see when it was dark, but you could see when it was light. Like, talk to us about how awe has been a renewable resource in your life, because you've got some other great stories about doing some work on pollution, on ocean pollution, that I think probably comes from this place where awe lives for you.
There's a quote by a British writer named G.K. Chesterton.
Yeah.
That is, we are perishing for want of wonder, not for want of wonders. And I just think that is so true. We are just surrounded by beauty and mystery, and there is wonder to behold everywhere, and yet we are so blind to it.
It's a real problem in modern life, I think. Edie, my husband and I just retired from being dentists for 37 years. And now every morning in my life, I have a special spot where I sit, and I've moved my bird feeder from way out in the driveway to 18 inches from this window where I sit with my tea every morning for an hour and a half. And I literally sit for an hour and a half. I'm not sure if collectively over 37 years I ever sat for an hour and a half altogether, because I was just racing through every hour. But now I realize that those same chickadees, the same blue jays, the same red squirrels, now I can recognize individuals. The wonder was always there.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't have the time. I didn't have the self-awareness to look for it.
Right.
And I think that that's something you and your colleagues bring to the table for us everyday people, is that you're reminding us that those creatures were in the deep. They're there right now. They were there 100,000 years ago, and they're going to be there probably without us, whatever happens in the future. And that it's not for want of examples. It's just we're not looking hard enough.
Correct.
Talk to me how that spills over in your everyday life. Do you notice? Are you a gardener? Do you notice other things? Do you look for connections out in the wider world to this thing that you know so well?
Well, there's no question I've got a great appreciation of vision, and just I do spend time looking at things and really appreciating what I'm seeing. And but making those connections has also been a very important part of my life, and the fascination of trying to better understand this world that we live in, that is absolutely filled with these bioluminescent creatures. And that wonder, that mystery has drawn me again and again to the deep ocean. And yes, absolutely, the curiosity has overcome fear over and over and over again.
And I'm sure it's helped you practice the art of noticing.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's something that we need to be doing a better job of teaching.
Yes. So give me this. You told me a great story in our pre-call about this situation you noticed about places that have pollution and the changes in the bioluminescence organisms there. You've got some system of detecting.
Yeah. So when I started the not-for-profit that I'm CEO of now, the Ocean Research and Conservation Association, it was in response to some reports that had come out about the state of the ocean that were pretty alarming. The 2003 Pew Oceans Commission report, 2004 the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy report, and they talked about the deteriorating state of the ocean and how alarming this was. And so I wanted to respond to this, and a lot of what I had done in my career is work with engineers to find solutions to new ways to explore the deep sea. And I thought I could apply that same approach to addressing these challenges, which were emphasizing the need for real-time monitoring where pollution was coming from in the environment. And so I started Orca with the idea of developing these water quality monitoring systems that we call Kilroys. And we now have the largest real-time monitoring network in the state of Florida, up and down the 156-mile-long Indian River Lagoon. And when I was first getting it started, I got funding from a foundation that was in Pennsylvania, actually, and I went up to make a presentation to their board about this water quality monitoring network. And one of the board members asked me, so how do you know where to put a Kilroy? And I said, well, we try to figure out where the hot spots of pollution are. And, I gave an answer, but when I came back, I kept thinking about it over more and more. And I was thinking, that is a really good question.
Because a Kilroy is
the
device.
Is a water quality monitoring device.
Okay, yeah. Got it. Okay.
Each one costs $80,000. So you want to make sure you put it in the best place possible. And so we started taking sediment samples to look at how pollution was accumulating in the sediments to figure out where the hot spots are. But if you're going to test for every possible pollutant, the cost and the time, it's insurmountable. It can't be done. And so what I figured we needed was a broad spectrum bioassay, the equivalent of a canary in the coal mine, something simple that could tell us where things were toxic. It wouldn't tell us what the toxins were. And so I was looking at different assays, but the one that jumped out at me was bioluminescent bacteria, because the light output in bacteria is linked to the respiratory chain. So any toxin that interferes with respiration interferes with the light output. So you could take a sediment sample, mix the bioluminescent bacteria with it, and be able to test to figure out, is this really toxic, a little bit toxic? And actually, this was not an assay that we invented. It was something called microtox. It was available at the time, but it had never really been used effectively because they were trying to do these extractions. And we wanted to know what was the bioavailable toxicity. And so I worked with a colleague, Dr. Beth Falls, who developed the assay that we still use to this day, using bioluminescent bacteria. And so we create these pollution maps that are like weather maps. Instead of red being hot and blue being cold, red is toxic and blue is non-toxic. And so they proved to be very powerful tools for us to be able to figure out where the pollution is coming from.
And I think one of the keys to that we forget is that, we don't have time for randomness.
Yeah.
We need to have very directed, very carefully positioned responses in the world. And, without scientists like Dr. Widder and the bounty of data, which we may not at the time realize can be applicable. You got any examples of things that turned out to be applicable to something 10 years later that you learned?
Yeah, I mean, we're finding stuff all the time that the impact of biosolids taken from wastewater treatment plants and spread on agricultural land. Now suddenly we're discovering that a lot of those biosolids had forever chemicals mixed into them, PFAS. But its impact is at the level of parts per trillion. It's absolutely astonishing. And we're finding these things all the time, and we're messing with our life support machinery without actually understanding how it works. And so I think that's one of the greatest challenges we're facing right now.
Yeah, you have this great statement about exploring before we exploit.
Yeah, so our traditionally as human beings, we have explored a new region of the planet and then gone on to exploit it. Incredibly, in the ocean, we've reversed that. We've been exploiting the ocean before we've explored it, dragging nets across the bottom to be able to bring up a few shrimp while wiping out deep sea gardens of Eden that are just filled with unbelievable creatures that we know nothing about.
Do you care to comment? And we can leave this part out if you'd like, but you've just reminded me that I'm not much of a seafood eater because I don't know the impact of that choice as a consumer. So I just don't. And I remember my husband and I are great world travelers. We could have had all kinds of things that people have, but we didn't want things. We wanted experiences. So I remember taking our kids to Newfoundland when they were quite little, and we went out on a boat with a local fisherman. And just what you described is exactly what he did. He drug this big metal thing behind us, and it was as big as this desk and solid steel, and just drug it along the ground at the bottom of the ocean for maybe an hour as we trolled about. And then we went ashore and he gave us some real scallops right out of the shell. I remember being like filled with turmoil because I was shocked that that's where scallops came from. I guess I just didn't realize it. And I wanted to appreciate the joy of the moment and that this is this guy's life's work and his dad before him and so forth. But
yeah, this is going on all over the planet, out of sight and out of mind, and it's catastrophic. It's just unbelievable to be able to wipe out these ecosystems that have sustained life for millions of years, and for one haul of shrimp, it won't be able to sustain any reasonable amount of life for hundreds of years to come. And it's so short-sighted. We've had it going on locally here. There's a deep sea coral reef offshore of Florida called the Oculina Reef that was discovered in the 70s. And the rock shrimp fishery went out and created what they call goat trails by dragging chains behind the ship to be able to destroy all of the beautiful coral, the Oculina coral, ivory coral as it's called, to create a trawl path for their bottom trawling for these rock shrimp. And when submersible diving revealed, what was happening out there, that was the world's first deep sea marine protected area created in the United States right here. And now they're in the process of trying to reverse that and make it available to the rock shrimp fish. They've tried multiple times and they just keep coming back over and over again. And it makes no sense. It's a very small fishery. It's a few $1 million a year. And that is the nursery for snook and, a lot of the game fish that the much larger billion-dollar fishing industry should be sustaining. But this is just all ignorance.
And that's one of the things that you're big on. I love the way you're working to have people understand better, because we protect what we understand, right? We can't see this ourselves, so we're relying on great science communicators like you to help us understand what we need to know to make better decisions as consumers or take action and so forth. So tell me, and I think this is another connection here. You also talk about one of the greatest migrations on the planet happens every single day.
Yeah, this is so astonishing that people don't know this, but the largest animal migration on the planet is vertical migration. It occurs in the oceans around the world every single day, where animals go down into the dark depths to hide during the day and then come up and feed in the food-rich surface waters where photosynthesis occurs under cover of darkness. It's a massive game of hide and seek. And the reason that there is so much bioluminescence on this planet is because in the open ocean environment where most life occurs, there's no hiding places. There's no trees or bushes to hide behind. The only way to hide is to go down into the dark depths. And so selection pressure on those animals that evolved that way of hiding from their predators was to develop more sensitive eyes and more enhanced visual signaling capabilities to help them find food, attract mates, defend against predators, all of it using bioluminescence.
And we're back to the awe again, using awe as a renewable resource. There's even some point in our conversation when you reminded us that that's available to us too, to just everyday people, to let awe work in their favor.
Absolutely. And there's so much access now in ways that we could never have imagined early on. You don't need to be a submersible diver. I mean, there are other ways that you can gain access.
And that comes back to a point that you made that hit me like just a punch in the gut, is that, you said that Martin Luther King didn't say, "I have a nightmare." He said, "I have a dream." That
Yeah,
is just so,
that's not original with me. I've heard several
I
people,
know.
but yeah, he did not promote the civil rights movement by preaching "I have a nightmare," and that's what we're trying to do with the environmental community, and it's not working. What a surprise!
I don't do the like, share, subscribe thing on this podcast like other podcasters do. And I totally get that that's the way you pay the light bill. Um, but the reason to share this kind of an episode is that you never know whose eyes and ears it might land in front of, who might be able to make a difference, or who might be teetering on some discovery that can be connected to Edie's work, or on and on it goes. Share this episode because we have a dream, Edie and I, and millions of other people who have experienced the wonder of the wider world. We've got to have a dream. It's not a nightmare that'll get us out of the climate situation that we're in. It's the dreams. So that brings me to a question. Tell me a few stories from your hopeful log. Like what keeps you going? Tell me a few cool things that keep you hopeful.
Well, we have an amazing, enthusiastic group here at Orca of people that are attacking these problems in a new way. So we have a very transdisciplinary approach to trying to understand our local ecosystem and figure out what we need to do to be protecting it. And I've just been so encouraged by the response of the community. It's completely bipartisan. And that's so rare these days, but people care about the environment, and it's obviously in their best interest to do so. It's all about their health and their wealth. If we're having toxic algae blooms that have now been connected to things like neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and ALS and Parkinson's, we need to be figuring out where the nutrients are coming from that are feeding those toxic algae blooms. And there are just so many reasons also for their wealth. Their real estate values are going to be, nobody wants to have their house living next to a toxic algae bloom. And yet these are the kinds of things that are happening because we're not being connected to our environment. The places where people are going to want to live in the future are where communities have come together to be able to solve these problems. And I'm encouraged by the transdisciplinary approach and how the kind of impact that I'm seeing it having here at Orca. And we want to spread the things that we're learning as many ways as we possibly can. We've developed a toolbox, a tool chest over time of monitoring capabilities and ways that communities can be able to track pollution in their own environment and then act to bring about change.
And it really does come down to communities. I was just looking up how I connected with you. It was through Kendra Bergman of the Coastal Connections group in Vero Beach.
Correct.
Yes, I did a trip with her to one of those great nights when all the sea turtles come ashore in Costa Rica. It was an incredible week, but I really could see what Kendra was leading there was local. The friend who introduced me to her goes out at night. They take turns scouring. I don't even know how many miles of beach to know exactly where sea turtles are nesting and trying to facilitate the healthy hatching of the nest and so forth. And that example, really getting a window into that world, made me realize that there are countless people who want to do something impactful. And I want you to take a minute to tell us how people can connect with Orca, with your organization. What do you need next? Like, if there was some big breakthrough that you know is right there, but you need the funding or the right connections or introductions, what can people do?
We want to now share a lot of the discoveries that we've been making, the techniques that we've been developing. And so we have created the Orca Blue Planet Scholars Program, which is where we need funding for summer internships to be able to train people in these transdisciplinary approaches. And so for $15,000, you can have a named scholarship program or just contribute a much smaller sum. And we're putting these together. But if you go to teamorca.org and click on the donate there, that's one of the possibilities is part of this Blue Planet scholarship program, and those scholars are going to be the future in terms of getting people to know about what's going on in their local environment and converting awe into action.
That is such an important phrase because, here in Vermont, we've had a few nights with the Northern Lights.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I've never seen the Northern Lights. I really never do that.
Oh no, it's so incredible. I grew up in Illinois and it was rare if ever. But now that I live near Montreal, it's, 3 feet of snow out there, brisk, really brisk. But on the right nights, there's nothing like the Northern Lights to remind us of, this feeling of awe. And I never thought about it, this transition from awe to action that you mentioned in our pre-call. That I think is important. So, Edie, as we try and wrap up, you and I mentioned before we started recording today that sometimes, all you get is that 2 or 3 minutes. If the New York Times calls you or the Smithsonian Magazine or whatever, you get 2 minutes to give it your best stuff and translate this wonder that you've had a lifetime learning about. If this interview had only been a couple, 3 minutes, what do you really wish people knew? Is there something that your lived experience has told you that sometimes you just wish people knew?
So the question is, what gem can we use to get across the thing that we've been saying over and over again, is how little we actually understand the machinery of life on our planet. That is so critical. And I know kids that think that we've explored our whole planet. That's the excuse for space exploration. We've already explored our planet. Now we move on to space. It just isn't true. And so, what the thing that, excited you, for example, is the most massive animal migration pattern on the planet is happening in the ocean every day and people don't know it. Or the destruction of the bottom of the ocean through bottom trawling that's going on all around the world all the time. What are the things that we need to convey to get people to make that connection and understand the machinery of life and what it takes to survive on this rock?
Mm-hmm. And are you here to tell us that what you're seeing is worth saving?
Oh my goodness, is it ever? I wish, for so long throughout my career, I just had to tell people what I was seeing because there weren't cameras that could collect it in any way, and then they were very inadequate. But now recently there are cameras that actually can show people what this bioluminescence looks like. And actually there's a documentary coming out called A Life Illuminated, and that life illuminated is my life. And it's been making the rounds of the film festivals and getting just fantastic reviews and standing ovations, and people are seeing the awe of what I've been seeing so much in my life, and I'm just so thrilled to finally be able to share it in this way.
Oh, that is just a great way to wrap this up. Okay, so I'll get back to you after we're done with this interview, perhaps tomorrow, and we'll make sure that we have all kinds of links like this. Can people get to that, to Life Illuminated yet?
It's still within the film festival world,
okay.
Which means that they were hoping to, I think, sell it to Netflix or something like that, at which point next year, probably.
All right.
This year, 26 maybe.
How about videography, inspiring videography, just that the average Joe Bag of Donuts, me, can get to about bioluminescence? Do you have some of your videos?
Yeah, we'll send you some links.
Okay, great. All right. So go to the Goodness Exchange, free to the world. We'll have a link to this article. Just look for Dr. Widder's name and it'll bring you to all kinds of wonder and awe and joy. Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
And thank you for what you're doing. I think it's very important to be able to share this kind of positivity. And I think it's the way to go.
Well, I tell you, we've got a choice, don't we? If we have nothing else, we have a choice about what we give our attention to. And I decided about 12 years ago, I was just not going to give my attention to anyone building chaos.
There you go.
That's it. Even if they're on my side of politics or they're, spouting things I believe in seriously. I mean, the grace of Jane Goodall was that she found a way to say what needed to be said with grace, without shouting, while appreciating the lived experience of others. And so that's what we do here. We shine a light on what's right with the world, and we give the microphone to folks like you who are changing our shared future. Thank you so much, Edie Widder.
Thank you, Linda.
Okay, have a great day, everyone.